Hey everybody, Matt Colville here. We played D&D last week, and we're going to play tonight, 7 o'clock Pacific, whether you like it or not. You're watching this video, you might as well tune in. Last week was quite a lot of fun. Actually, I had a blast running, especially the encounter at the end of the evening. This is the campaign diary where we talk about what happened last week, and I kind of narrate it to you folks, and then I talk about how I think things went. This is the downtime between two adventures where the players have the opportunity to pursue their own goals and also to keep their ears to the ground listening for signs of new contracts they could take, new jobs for the chain of Acheron. They just met with the curator, who is someone who can procure magic items for them. They now have some new magic items and others they're going to have to wait for. So the first half of the session was the chain of Acheron meeting with lots of different NPCs in the world. The political game is starting to ramp up a little bit. The heroes are split up. Boots, Tom's character, who is the lieutenant, the second in command of the chain of Acheron, is staying at the prince's footstool with the junior officers, and the chain of Acheron, that's sort of a middle-class tavern, and then the rest of the senior officers are staying at the Pharaoh's Dream. The session begins with Vaz, the dwarf who sort of runs the day-to-day operation of the footstool for the stone giant Grant, approaching Boots's table and slamming a mug of dwarven ale down in front of him. He says, "On the house, Hell Trooper! Lo, though such charity pains me, I deem this may smooth the way between us." He's there to basically apologize for Grant, the stone giant's attitude, telling Boots that they know that the chain of Acheron didn't have anything to do with what happened last night, and that Grant, because Grant owns this place, he tends to overreact. I had a lot of fun playing Vaz. In my setting, dwarves are basically short Klingons, so I often enjoy just playing them extemporaneously, but nothing happened in that encounter. It was literally just Boots getting to know the people who run the inn that they're staying at. We then cut to the Pharaoh's Dream, and the heroes are having brunch in the Hanging Garden, which is one of the 3 different restaurants inside this very expensive tavern, and a very pregnant Riojan woman approaches the table. This is Demelza Mendano. She is an agent for the Office of Exchange Integrity. She's the Associate Director of Domestic Affairs. She works for the Fulcrum's spy agency, but she's not a spy. She's just sort of a mid-level bureaucrat. The Office of Exchange Integrity are the Fulcrum's spy network, but they are also a legitimate bureaucratic division of the administration of the island. They're not secret or anything. Demelza really is in charge of making sure that people in the city are paying their fair taxes and stuff like that. They're just also spies and political agents. So Demelza is here to ask the chain of Acheron if they would be interested in maybe helping with getting the mercenaries that have taken over the Citadel out of the Citadel, or out of the Citadel. This is where politics starts to ramp up, and it's going to ramp up like this. It's not going to be a slow burn. It's going to get very complex very quickly, because Demelza is here to explain that the mercenaries, the Shooting Star, that took over the Citadel, which is a military building on this island, they are in the pay of the Church of St. Pilario the Aspirant. So that night that the heroes met the other night, Commander Donagalt, the member of the Black Gloves, the Order of the Black Gloves, he is a knight in service to the Church of St. Pilario the Aspirant, and that church is one of the churches under the domain of House Navarre. House Navarre is sort of the official religious house. They run most of the churches in the city. So this is where things are starting to get a little thorny, because the Fulcrum are a great house. Shirome, the leader of the Fulcrum, is effectively a duke or a duchess. They control this island. The Citadel is on the island. House Navarre, one of its churches, paid these mercenaries to take over the Citadel, which is an important asset. It looks as though this is the beginning of a move on the part of House Navarre against the Fulcrum. Right now, it's just a bunch of mercenaries, but she explains that depending on when the chain of Acheron take the job, it may be a lot more. It may be the mercenaries and the Knights of the Black Gloves. It may be the mercenaries, the Knights of the Black Gloves, and any army they are able to get onto the island. And of course, they would probably, hide their livery or pretend to be some other organization so that they can't. It's more difficult for instance, the papers to link House Navarre to what's happening on the Citadel. But the sooner the chain take care of this, the less they have to worry about that. I really enjoyed playing Demelza Mendano. I imagined her as essentially Olivia Colman from The Night Manager. If you haven't seen The Night Manager, holy crap, is that a super super good, incredibly well-produced BBC miniseries. It looks like a movie, and it stars Tom Hiddleston as basically James Bond, and Olivia Colman is amazing in it. She's amazing in everything, and she's pregnant in it, and she's a spy master. She is Tom Hiddleston's handler, and so I thought, I'm just gonna have some of that. So she's really not what you would expect from a spy master. She's like, wow, this place is nice, isn't it? You folks are doing well for yourselves. She's also starving because she's pregnant. She finds that she's always hungry now, so she's asking Leech if she can have some of his food, and he's like, oh, are you hungry? And Slim, played the Gith Yankee, played by Phil, says, of course she's hungry. Look at her. She's full of eggs.
She's probably got 30, 40 eggs in there.
Yeah, there's a lot of eggs in there.
She's like, blind, I hope not. Which is, I think, one of the best lines of dialogue we've had so far, completely improvised. And I basically shut down the game for about 45 seconds as we all laughed at it. Because Gith are hatched, apparently. This is something that Phil knows a lot more about Gith lore than I do. They say they're going to have to think about it, which now has become code for, we're going to go find out who you are, because we now have our own little burgeoning spy network, and we don't want to get bit in the ass by taking a job from somebody and then only finding out. We don't mind that things are more complex than they seem. Things are always more complex than they seem. There's always unintended consequences to anything the chain is going to do. They just want to have more intelligence, more of their own intel that they've gathered on these organizations. So she has made her case. They have said they're interested, but they're going to have Angel look into it, and they don't tell her this. They're going to have their spy, then their spy network, investigate the Office of Exchange Integrity and find out what is actually going on. Speaking of Angel, a young woman, she looks Baslorian, she has blonde hair, but she is dressed in the Riojan style, comes into the prince's footstool and approaches Boots' table. She sits down, she orders a drink, and she says, we have a mutual friend, a guardian angel sent me. This is Orlandria de Giete. She is Angel's first recruit in their new spy network. The players said they wanted to know what's going on with this library job. A herald working for the Royal Heraldic Society offered us a job to go to one of the other islands off the coast of Capital, still hugely urbanized, still part of the city proper, one of the smaller islands off the coast called the Pellet, and go to a library to retrieve a government document, because this library is also effectively like a city hall. There are lots of these dotted all over Capital. This is something the players had asked for before. It was one of the first directives they gave Angel. They're like, we need to find out who these people are that are offering us jobs. And one of the jobs we have on offer is the library job. Who are these people? What is the Royal Heraldic Society, and what is it they actually want? This is the first chance the players have had to use their new spy network. This is a mechanism from the forthcoming product Kingdoms and Warfare, which we are going to kickstart. There'll be a link in the doobly-doo if you want to get signed up and get an alert when it comes out. These are rules that I have used in previous editions of D&D. We're just tweaking them for 5th edition. It's up to Tom to make the espionage roll, but instead of using Boots' stats, he's using the stats for their spy network, which is a level 2 spy network. Higher is better. You're going to add the level of your spy network to the roll, and just having a spy network means you're proficient in this, which means I think it's +3. So it's +3 because you have a spy network, and then +2 because it's a 2nd level spy network. Higher is better, and they spent a lot of money and they put an experienced person in charge of it. So instead of starting with a 1st level network, I decided they have a 2nd level network. I didn't know that Tom basically couldn't fail. In my notes, I had written down what information they would learn depending on their result, including if they failed. And I decided that if they failed completely, they would still learn basically what anybody who was raised in this city and had been paying attention would know about the Royal Heraldic Society and the library. So they would still get some information. It's just the kind of information normal people who live here would know. That would still be valuable to the chain because they're not from around here. They don't know what's been going on in the city for the last 10 years. Then they got one level of success, which was DC 5, so they got some more information, but they didn't get the juiciest stuff because he rolled a 1. She describes the Royal Heraldic Society as being just one of dozens, and they make their money inventing noble lineages for guild members so that those guild members can get invited to the right parties. She explains this is a long tradition here in Capital, and the players are starting to understand that a noble title it's really just a tradition. It's not a law of physics or nature or anything like that. Even the long established families, House Navarre, House Alvaro, they once were just bloodthirsty, warriors, and they declared themselves a noble house and no one could do anything about it. I think the players once had a pretty simple attitude toward the legitimacy of a noble title and that it came from some great objective organization. But in fact, it's It really is just a tradition. And if somebody says, I am a noble, and they're willing to back it up with steel, then they are a noble. That's how it works in the real world, by the way. She says if they offer you knighthoods, maybe don't accept it because they do work for Shirome. They're part of the Fulcrum's infrastructure, which means if you took a knighthood from them, you wouldn't know that you were working for Shirome. You would appear to be independent operators. You would act like independent operators until you were relying on those knighthoods to do something, at which point an agent from the Fulcrum might come along and remind you that they are your patrons and they can take those knighthoods away unless you help them out. The players, they don't like that. That's the kind of stuff anybody who lives in the staves would know. But then she tells Boots the stuff that you get for a minor success. She says, of course, you know you'll be fighting tons of undead, so be prepared for that. And Boots is like, undead? And she's like, yeah, because the library is built on top of an old mausoleum. Mostly what Capital is built on is old Capital, and parts of it go back thousands of years. This was once, an outpost of the Kalian Empire, and then basically it's Capital City. She says, yeah, it's dangerous to go down there, and every new library administration locks the place up, declaring it unsafe. But then they run out of room to store documents in the library, and they're like, well, I guess we got to open this place up and start using it again. Or they need to go down there to get old documents that were stored by previous administration. So it's a cycle of, oh, it's too dangerous, lock it up, and oh, we need room, better open it up. That's as much as the chain knows. There was more, which if you're a patron at the $5 level or above, you can go read my notes for the session. If you don't want to spend any money, you can just wait. Once this adventure, which is probably going to take another, I would say, 1 or 2 sessions, once this adventure is over and the notes are complete right now, they don't get you to the end of the adventure, then I'll put them up online for everybody. Tom has to then make the second part of the espionage roll, which is, did the Fulcrum learn you were spying on them? And it's an opposed roll. Tom rolls, and he rolls pretty well, but spoilers, the Fulcrum rolled better. So the Fulcrum knows that the chain is digging, but they didn't learn anything extraordinary or crazy, so I'm not sure if anything is going to happen from that, but I made a note of it. We then cut back to the Pharaoh's dream, and a herald announces the arrival of the Marquis Damasco, and the Marquis Damasco strides in. He's wearing a military uniform. He basically, I said, looks like Patrick Stewart from around 1984, so like Dune, and he's got, medals. Instead of wearing a Rowan noble's outfit, he's wearing a military uniform, and he dismisses the herald, tells him to shut up. He's not down with all this finery and frippery. The players immediately recognize this guy. He is the same nobleman who stopped them when they were on their way into Capital and boarded their ship and inspected the Somnium Tenebris. He's a member of House Verona. They run the Navy. The players have since learned that passing of inspection, the reason it was so easy was because House Verona wants everybody in Capital to think these guys work for us, which is apparently working. It's one of the reasons the Fulcrum didn't try to arrest any of them when they were using magic on the promenade, they have learned. He approaches the senior officers of the chain of Acheron and treats them like officers in a military company. He is an officer in a military organization. He says, would you be interested in a guest lecture giving a guest lecture at the academy, at the military academy? You would be free to pick the subject, talk about whatever you want. The Chronicle alone is an invaluable piece of military history. We've got lots of records of what happened in many of the battles listed therein, but only one side of the battle, and you folks have the other side. Plus, he points to Slim and says, you have a Gith with you, and he wants to talk to Slim and say, the way Gith fight in the battles that you've seen on the Astral Sea, no one in the Academy has seen anything like it. So the Marquis Damasco has made his case. It seems as though the senior officers like the idea. He says, well, you can get in touch with me. He stands up to leave and he goes, I forgot. By the way, a friend of mine he names the person in House Alvaro, gave me a couple of tickets to the opera. I hate the opera. He describes it as women who've eaten too much, singing till they drop dead, while women who haven't eaten enough twirl around in the background, and 60-year-old men pretend to be love-struck teenagers. He tosses the tickets on the ground and he says, I'm told you haven't visited Capital until you've seen the opera, but I have no use for these. You're free to use them if you want. The players interpret this as a show on the part of the Marquis Damasco, trying to transmit to everyone around that, yes, in fact, the chain do work for House Verona. Remember that. Obviously, they work for us. Look how nice and charitable we are to each other. Look, I gave them a couple tickets to the opera. That's basically the end of the first half of the session. The half-elf that works for the Royal Heraldic Society comes back to the heroes and says, I hope you've thought about the job. We really need you to take care of this. And they negotiate regarding a fee. And the players come up with the idea that we don't want to be made knights, and we don't just want money. We would like some money. But instead of paying us as much as the last guys paid us, how about if you pay us less and you come up with some documents that will demonstrate that Boots, who is Riohan, was born and raised in Capital. He left 10 years ago, so a lot of the stuff going on now with like magic carpets and stuff baffles him. But let's come up with some documentation, legitimate documentation, demonstrating that Boots is the scion of some noble house. The Herald agrees to this. They sign a contract, and now the senior officers of the chain of Acheron are on their way to the Pellet, which is a small island, still, again, very urbanized, a small island off the coast of Capital, considered by everybody to be part of the city proper. There are ferries that go back and forth all the time. There are bridges that connect it to both Capital and the Stays, and now they are on the library job. I described the Pellet to them. It has two different districts. It's got the Olive District, and then it's got the Columns. And there's a gate. There's a wall separating the two districts, and a city gate they're able to get past relatively easily because they have been given courier seals from the Herald. And this is how they're going to get on the island with their weapons. It's explained to them that these courier seals don't allow you to take, well, couriers aren't allowed to carry weapons. However, they look basically the same as a knight's seal, and you look way more like knights than you do couriers. So if anybody tries to stop you, just flash these. They'll assume you're knights. They'll let you through. They have to produce these seals when they take the ferry. There are guards there to make sure no one enters the city with their weapons. And this is a deception check. Boots has to make a persuasion or a deception check. It's up to him in order to trick the guards into thinking that these are knights' seals and they are knights. And of course, he rolls another one. But because of his bard abilities, which I'm pretty sure we misplayed, by the way, his minimum result is still like a 15 or something. If we had used the bard rules correctly, it wouldn't have been so high, but he probably would have succeeded anyway. And the players were really worried when they discovered that this was going to come down to a die roll. They started thinking, what if we fail the roll? But all that would have meant, and I explained that to them, I said, okay, you pass the test, you convince the guards that you're knights, you don't have to, it's not going to cost you anything, there's not going to be any greased palms, no graft is going to have to happen. The players are like, oh, I get it. If we had failed to, if they detected that we were couriers and not knights, it would have just meant we would have had to spend some money. This is another instance of the players hearing about these cultural realities, but treating them like physical laws, right? The idea that you can't go to Capital, the city, you can't leave the docks with your weapons, and they're like, oh, unless you have a knight, unless you're knights, and the players are like, oh, how do we go about doing this? How do we get, and it doesn't occur to them that people do it all the time. It's just, there's bribery, there's deception. These are human beings enacting these rules. Some of them just don't care about, depending on how you get onto the city. There's always a way. Remember, the dragon knights are incorruptible. That's not a physical law. That is just a thing that people perceive. And everything in Capital is just down to perception. Just like here in the real world, the idea that these people are nobles, the idea that we're knights, this is just down to what are you willing to claim and how are you going to back it up? They get onto the Pellet without any incident. They move through the Olive District, which is a lot more suburban, and then they get to the Columns, which is named that because there are all these buildings left over still being used from the Kalian Empire, and the Kalian Empire is basically my Roman Empire analog. It's a very bureaucratic district. In fact, there are a lot of people who live in Capital or in the Olive District who then either take a ferry or the bridge or just go through the gate to get to work here in the Columns. And I describe the library. I've got a map of the library. I've got pictures of the library taken from a real Harvard library that looks like this, ancient Roman structure. And the players enter the library and they meet the librarian. The library is huge. It's marble everywhere. There are dozens of people in here working and doing research. It's a very impressive structure. And the librarian is, I describe in my notes, as like the most Riohan person they have yet met. She is not only a librarian, she's also a playwright. She's working on her play when they come up to her. She's got all these pieces of paper all over the place in different levels of disarray. They never asked, by the way, we'll talk about this when we get to the post-mortem. They never asked like what she was working on or any of that stuff, but I had all these notes about who she was, her background, and the play she was working on. They say, hey, we're here to look for this document. We were given a serial number from the Herald. Is it here? How do we get it? And she looks at it and she goes, oh, this is going to be in the mausoleum. You folks look like you're able to handle yourselves, so let's go down there. They have a lot of questions for her, like, what happened to the courier that came here before us? And she's like, what courier? Right? She's just one of many people who work here, and they don't have, like, they have records of when people check things out, but they don't have records of this person went to this part of the library. It's a library. So the players wanted a lot more information than I thought was reasonable for just a random librarian to have. And there's a lot of great back and forth because the players have learned that this is a mausoleum full of undead, but that's not how the librarian describes it. The librarian says, well, you know, this is a very old building and we have records going back literally thousands of years, and there are many noble families who have stored important documents here, and they are still interested in protecting them even though they are no longer with us. So that's how she perceives it, is that the undead down there are just frisky dead nobles who don't want people interfering with their heritage. She leads them a couple of floors down to a large metal bulkhead. I describe it being like a submarine door. She has a huge key. She opens it up. A blast of cold air comes out. Now they're going down into darkness. They have to get torches. I think they cast a light. The bard. There are a couple of characters that have, I think King and Boots both have lights. So they cast light on people's armor and helmets and stuff like that, as is traditional. And they're now descending into a crypt, a classic D&D encounter, which they only got through one encounter, but I'm really looking forward to doing more of that tonight. Again, it's only probably going to be about 5 encounters, of which they've already got through 1. So this is going to be a very small dungeon compared to any published dungeon from any edition of D&D, but that's about what I think is reasonable to expect the players to get through in 5th edition. And if I wanted to do something more elaborate, and we're going to, then what I would do is probably try to string together groups of 5 encounters and theme them all differently, so the players still felt like about every 5 encounters were making progress. It's gray and dusty down here. There are cobwebs everywhere. It's a different kind of stone than the marble above. They descend some stairs and end up in a room with 3 sarcophagi. The sarcophagi have been opened. The players are wary, but when they look inside, they discover that while there are dead bodies in there, people were buried here, there are also tons of documents. They're just scrolls piled up in here. The players look at some of the scrolls and they have serial numbers on them. A lot of them are just written on the back in quill ink, but then some of them have stamps on them depending on how old they are. There's also a doorway in here that is open so the players can continue to the next area, but I describe it as looking like this was a secret door. Like it's the fitting around the edge of it is just going to completely vanish if it were closed, but it's just standing open right now. Again, representing that idea that this once was a mausoleum where people protected, their treasures and their dead, and now it's just being used as a bureaucratic office, so they have no need for secret doors. The players inspect the sarcophagi, they go through the secret door, they go down another layer of stairs. There are now several floors below the surface. They find a couple of statues that have piles of scrolls at their feet. They make a history check and they determine that these 2 statues are of gods of Commonwealth, i.e. Kalian Empire gods, the god of life and the god of death. And the god of life has her face desecrated. Basically someone's taken tools and hacked at it. And the players did something really clever, which I had not thought of. They look at the serial numbers on these documents and they're like, are these serial numbers closer in order to the one we're looking for? Or are they farther away? I'm like, yeah, they are. You are getting closer. There's like a 4-number code at the beginning of the serial number, and these are higher up than the ones in the room before. And the document you have, the number you have is much, much higher than this one, implying there's still a lot of dungeon to go. And they're able to use the serial numbers because there is some organization down here. Each pile, each room represents a different kind of category of document, and they're able to use the serial numbers to figure out, are we going in the right direction? If there's a branch, they can look left, look at the document, go right, look at the document, say which one is closer to the one we're looking for, and go in that direction. And that caused me to have to sort of improvise an entire encounter, because when they did come to a T intersection and there was a left and a right, they went down one part of the corridor only far enough to find some documents, look at the serial number, and I knew that was a dead end. And I knew the document they were looking for wasn't down here. So that meant, looking at the serial number, this was lower than the previous one. So don't go this way, go the other way. But there was a really nice encounter down here, and there wasn't anything about that encounter that I thought was important to the plot. I didn't need to use that encounter. I just thought it's about time for something to happen. So something needs to happen. And I had a list of all the different things that could be found down here, including some planned encounters and then just a bunch of monsters in case I needed them. No plan or idea of how I would use them. And I decided now is the time to bust some of those out. As Boots reaches into one of the sarcophagi in an alcove to grab a document and see what its serial number is, Judge notices a ghostly figure floating toward them, a skeleton that is hovering off the ground and moving down the corridor toward him. And tellingly, by the way, Lars has been really good about when they go into situations like this, remembering how my world works and the fact that human beings, not dwarves or elves or gith or goblins, can sense, not detect, it's not directional, they can sense the presence of undead within about 30 feet. So when they enter the mausoleum, Lars is like, do we get that kind of hair standing on the back of our neck? And I'm like, nope. But he didn't ask that in this situation, which is good, because if he had, he would have heard the answer was, no, you're still not near any undead, and that would have given away what this encounter was. Tom, who recognized my gesture from earlier stories I've told him about D&D, even though we've never encountered one of these before, suddenly realized what it was and kept his mouth shut. If you watch the stream, you can see that moment. You notice this skeleton kind of, it looks like it's floating off the ground, and it's moving toward you. It's going to be initiative.
Spooky, scary.
That's better. Finally.
It's initiative. Judge steps forward to attack the skeleton, and as he does so, he goes and squishes, hits this otherwise invisible. They made perception checks. They didn't notice it. This otherwise invisible gelatinous wall, because indeed, this is a gelatinous cube. And happily, because of the way the initiative order played out, the next thing that happened after that was, as Boots is reaching into this sarcophagus to get a scroll, looking down the corridor, seeing Judge fighting this giant jello mold and going, what the heck is going on? The sarcophagus, it sprouts teeth and eyes and goes, no, it's a mimic. I had actually put a miniature down showing the sarcophagus and the headstone, and I had another miniature of the same thing from a Kickstarter, a mimic Kickstarter, all painted, that was that same object but with teeth and eyeballs. And so I swapped it out, and even though Tom had guessed that's a gelatinous cube, no one had guessed that this is a mimic. I think Jerry guessed, because while he's watching from the control room, he's like, why? There's like lots of sarcophagi in here. Why did Matt only put one miniature out? Which I thought was fun. So yeah, this turned into basically probably one of the best encounters I've run recently. I was just delighted. I had no idea of how these two creatures were going to synergize. I just thought, let's throw a gelatinous cube and a mimic at them, but they synergized remarkably. It was so much fun for me, seeing how the mimic grabbed Boots, and then Judge got stuck inside the gelatinous cube, and then on the gelatinous cube's turn, it goes, and it washes over Boots while he's stuck in the mimic. So he is both trapped by the mimic and the gelatinous cube. They fight, they try to figure out what the heck's going on. Slim doesn't have enough movement to get there, and Slim is dishing out a colossal amount of damage right now. While they're waiting for Slim, Leech is zorching his eldritch blast with his agonizing blast at the gelatinous cube. Half the party gets enveloped by the gelatinous cube, and it starts digesting them, which put a big hitch in their get along. And then it's Boots' turn, and he has to figure out he has an action. He can use it to either extricate himself from the gelatinous cube, thereby getting him close to the mimic he's trapped with, or extricate himself from the mimic and therefore be stuck inside the gelatinous cube. And he decides, let me get out of this cube. So he pulls himself free from the cube, and now he's in the alcove, which happily is 10 feet wide. He's in the alcove with the mimic, and he's like, well, at least now I'm only fighting one thing. Then on the gelatinous cube's turn, and then when I realized that this was possible, and when I thought of this, you could see a huge smile on my face, because I know what the cube is going to do, and I couldn't wait for it to happen. Boots is now in the alcove with the mimic. It's the gelatinous cube's turn, and it goes, and it re-engulfs Boots. Yeah, I admit it is sort of out of the tone. The Chain of Akron is, you can't imagine something like this happening to the Black Company, but I love these old classic monsters, and Tom and like Matt O'Driscoll. Matt O'Driscoll didn't know what a gelatinous cube was. He had never heard of one, and he didn't know what a mimic was. So that was a pretty extraordinary encounter. I love deploying these old classic monsters for new players. Slim finally shows up, and he is able to make short work of the cube and the mimic. They had both taken a lot lot of damage, but Slim on his own just dishes out a stupid amount of damage, and now he has a psionic crystal, so he can use that to cast manifestations, one of which is Amplify, which gives you an extra, I think it's 3d8 on all your melee attacks for the next minute, which I thought was going to make a bigger difference than I thought, but 3d8 is only about 12 more damage, which, I mean, that is a lot, but Slim is 6th level now, and he was already doing between 50 and 70 damage a round, which is crazy. So it is more, but it didn't like double it or anything. And that was the end of the night. They fought a gelatinous cube and a mimic, and that got us to about 10:30, and I just had a blast. I just had so much fun in that last encounter. And now they're going to explore the rest of the mausoleum, which might take another week or two. So this is the point where we talk about, I told you the story of what happened. Here's how I think everything went. I'll tell you that even though I had a blast in that last encounter, the first half of the session I was not happy with. I generally feel as though the players don't have enough good options, and I'm working to fix that. I want to make sure that when they're in Capital, they feel like they have lots of things they can do on their own. I want to empower them to do things on their downtime, and so I talked to the players about that. I said, let me know what you want to do during your downtime now, your next downtime, so I can start prepping that stuff, and don't be afraid of going off on your own. We can play offline. We could even do a whole session that we record on, Tuesday or Friday or Saturday. So I think the players understand that, and I believe that it's going to get better, and it's going to feel like the players have more agency than I think they do right now. But also the thing about the first half of the session that sort of bugged me was I do a lot of work on these NPCs, and I really enjoy playing them, but the players don't seem to want to engage with them. And I think part of that's my fault, but I think part of it is the fact that a lot of these NPCs, they're kind of larger than life, and this is their city, and they know what's going on in the city, and the players don't. So I think the players often feel sort of like, we don't know what to ask. They never asked the librarian about what she was working on. Yeah, I really enjoy playing these NPCs, and I think part of it is, and by the way, this is not me asking for advice. I'm perfectly capable of diagnosing the problem on my own. I think part of it is because I enjoy playing these characters so much, and because I do have a very, very modest theatrical background. I was in theater all through high school and college. I enjoy, the role-playing aspect more, I think, than a lot of the players do. And so that kind of puts them on the defensive, if that makes sense. I feel like I can even see it happening when I'm like, hello. And the players are like, oh, they don't lean into these NPCs. So part of it is they often don't feel like they can trust these NPCs because it's Capital and everyone's a spy for somebody else. And also I think that I just enjoy, because I put a lot of work into it, I enjoy playing them. So the players like meeting these NPCs. I know because they talk about it. They like meeting these NPCs. They think they're cool and interesting characters, but they do not engage with them. So that is something we're going to work on. The politics in the city is about to ramp up very, very quickly for two reasons. It could go more slowly, and I think especially for viewers, maybe that if it went more slowly, it would be more easy to follow. But first of all, I don't want the players at this stage to feel like they actually are in control of what's happening. No, they are newcomers on a very complex stage. That's one reason things are going to get really complex really quickly, is because I don't think the Chain of Acheron are in a position to be able to decode everything that's happening, predict things, and act accordingly. But the other issue is just purely pacing, is that I think it's Dungeons and Dragons, things do need to get out of control quickly. So you're going to notice that, maybe not tonight, maybe you'll start seeing some of it at the end of the session tonight, but then almost certainly next week, you're going to see the politics are going to be at the forefront of what's happening now. It may seem to you watching this that the game is just incredibly complex, and how does Matt hold all this stuff in his head at once? But just be aware that a lot of the politics in my setting is after the fact. If you've been watching the campaign diaries, you know that the Marquis de Masco stopped the players as they were to inspect their ship before they entered the city. And I didn't really like the way that encounter went. I thought it lacked drama. And I was like, I should have done this better. I should have come up with some dramatic moments that give the encounter some tension. It was only weeks later when I was thinking about that, I invented the idea that the reason that inspection went so easily was because the Marquis de Masco wanted the rest of the city to believe that the Chain of Acheron were quasi-officially in the pocket of House Verona. I do stuff like that all the time. After the fact, reinterpreting events in a more sophisticated way, that goes a long way toward making the city feel real and dynamic and plausibly complex. But It's not stuff I plan ahead of time. I'm just looking for opportunities. And when I see them, I go, aha, I'm going to decide now that this thing that happened before really meant this. That's my way of saying you can do this too. It just don't imagine that I had all this stuff planned out ahead of time. Nothing could be further from the truth. I'm often going back and recontextualizing things that happened before with new information. And that makes it seem like I had planned this all along and that things are just really complex. I don't think the players for an instant imagined that I had invented the idea that the Marquis de Masco let them buy easily on purpose to make it seem like they were in House Verona's pay. They just accepted it. So yeah, the first half of the session, I now have this triple consciousness. I think all dungeon masters need to have double consciousness, where they're aware of everything going on behind the screens and how they think the adventure is going from their perspective of how did I plan? And then they also have to have this second consciousness of how are the players experiencing this? Are they having fun? Are they bored? Or are they not engaged? Do they not have agency? So you're always keeping these two different perspectives in mind. And now I have a third perspective, which is the audiences. And I don't think the first half of the evening was very watchable. And I think that comes down to the players just not feeling free to engage and role play with these NPCs, which we talked about earlier. But then the second half of the evening, I just thought was a blast. We were back in an element where everybody feels like they have equal footing and everybody can participate. And that was the dungeon crawl, which we're going to have more of. And I just loved that battle, that crazy, almost Grimtooth traps, Rube Goldberg device of the Mimic plus the Gelatinous Cube, which I had not planned. I made that encounter up on the spot, and it was just a huge success, I felt. That was it. That was the session and my post-mortem. I'm always going to be working to try to give this is always a process. It doesn't end. Whenever we do post-mortems like this on a session, there are people in the comments, the good-meaning, well-meaning people in the comments who they say you're being too hard on yourself, and there are other people who feel the opposite. But really, this isn't me complaining. This isn't me being cynical. This is just the normal process of being an artist. Is I'm always looking at the work and always trying to find ways to improve it. The players are having fun, but we could be doing better. And there's never going to be a point where I'm like, okay, I can stop trying to get better now. That will never happen. I'm always going to be looking at the scenario and saying, what could have gone better right now? Player agency. The players don't feel like they really understand what their options are in Capital. I want to fix that. I'm going to fix that. It's just going to take a while. And also, I want the players to feel like they matter more, like the Chain of Acheron is as cool and as important as we all sort of imagine it is. And right now, they're not really presenting themselves as, we're the Chain of Acheron. Who are you? Right? And I want that moment. So we're going to try and build toward that. And that might happen next week. I hope that was interesting or informative or entertaining. Maybe there's a lesson in there for some new dungeon masters. I hope to see you all tonight, 7 o'clock on Twitch, 7 o'clock Pacific. There's a link in the doobly-doo. Until next week, peace out.